Thank you for coming on, Ahmed. So normally we start with a check-in, just going around talking about how you're doing, how you're feeling, and anything else that you kind of want to express early on. And for the audience, a little bit about yourself, a small introduction as well.
Cool, thanks. Yeah, firstly, thanks for having me. Yeah, real pleasure to be here. Yeah, today I'm feeling quite in the mix of things. I've literally just been decorating downstairs, as I mentioned in our slight pre-chat, getting ready for a wedding event in the house, and then also, yeah, having a lot of different life events come up, and dealing with lots of different things. I feel that, in essence, I feel like I'm really in the mix of life at the moment. And yeah, a little bit about myself is that I call myself an emotional resilience coach, and it's something that I just recognized that I was very good at. It's emotional resilience, and what I mean by that is that ability to bounce back from difficult situations. And we all face difficulties in life, and so I realized how important that was, especially with the world we live in today. There just seems to be an influx of information and different events that's happening on a personal level as well as a international level. And so our ability to navigate difficulties is more important than ever.
Nice. My name's Jag, of course, and then yeah, the moment I'm feeling, I want to say, just in life in general, a little bit uncentered. I feel like I've been doing a lot of working, which has been, giving me other benefits, but I feel a bit uncentered in the sense of not being able to do the things that I want to do more of. So I took a little bit of a break with this podcast as well. So coming back in now, and yeah, it feels good. It feels good to start doing these things that I do enjoy more of, and kind of putting my energy and focus towards that. So all in all, I feel like I'm moving towards the right direction, which is what I want. So yeah, all in all, feeling good. Um, you mentioned kind of I guess managing your emotions, managing difficulty in that sense. And right now you're going through, I guess, different emotions. And we spoke a little bit about this in the pre-chat. On one side, death, on one side, I guess, marriage, joy, happiness in that side. How are you managing those two emotions? And I guess there's one thing you being able to manage them, and then obviously there's other people around you as well who probably have their own emotions that they might be projecting onto you. How are you managing those two kind of different scenarios?
I don't know, man. But I am. And I find like the so when it comes to death, like, I mean, fortunately or unfortunately, like, I've experienced quite a bit recently. My uncle passed away last year, as a very close uncle of mine, and the year before that, my nan. But the biggest loss I ever faced was my mum when I was 28. That was like 12 years ago. And I find, obviously, there's a grieving process, and there's no controlling that. And there's no, well, ideally, there's no controlling that. And what I mean by that is, I find it's best to just let these things come up and to it be experienced. So, like with the recent one that I mentioned before, my cousin who passed away recently, like, I wasn't really feeling too much, or at least I wasn't thinking too much, but there was definitely something happening inside, and I had no words for it. And yesterday was his funeral, and I could feel it a lot more. And when I came home, I just felt really tired. I felt really, really tired, and then that's when I recognized, like, oh, okay, now I'm in grief. Like, whereas before there was a bit of a period before between where he passed away, and then there was some like post mortem stuff that they were doing. So there was like no closure, and then again, yesterday seeing the family as well, and so I find more and more I find being present to life, and also, we just did a bit of meditation at the start. I also find that very powerful to, like, to calm myself or to center myself or to allow myself to be present to things, because it's so easy for my mind or to be like, right, okay, let's focus on this other thing or do this other thing, or I'm sure you can relate, like do work or whatever, and actually it's all just distracting from the thing that needs to be felt and experienced. So that's, I would say, how I've been yeah, with everything, not just with the death, but also everything else that's going on. There's been a lot of different things. So yeah.
So, yes, in essence, it sounds like what you're saying is like you go through these kind of different scenarios, different emotions come up, but rather than kind of reacting to them, you kind of try and center yourself, stay grounded in that moment, and later on you allow yourself to kind of feel those emotions more. Is that correct?
Each one is unique, I suppose. Like when my uncle passed away, I think that hit me really hard. Like that was like almost akin to when my mum passed away, you know, and there was a definite sort of just immediate shock. I think this is the thing is like there's no controlling, there's no ABC,
Mm,
and I think that's what helps me is the more I've just allowed myself to be and recognize when I'm not being or not allowing myself, which is just as important. I'm as I say that I'm realizing that's just as important to just recognize because maybe I'm not allowing myself to be, but at least I recognize it and I'll need the space to go off and then go right. Okay, I just need to do this. So like with my uncle, for example, I got into action mode because he passed away in Mauritius and I was in the UK at the time. And within 24 hours, I'd found myself a flight and was flying to Mauritius. And because in Islamic tradition, they bury pretty much the next day. But it was an overnight flight. And I used that to my advantage because I sat there for like 12 hours and in and out of crying, just like on this flight, just letting the tears come out because I was just inherently sad. Like he was a big character in my life, and I think that kind of these experiences have shaped how I am now, right now, with my cousin passing away, and having a different appreciation for death and life and these things. And I'm still, I wouldn't say I have answers. I'm just like self exploration, just going through it and finding things as I keep going.
have you always been like that, or has this been kind of shaped since your mother's death in terms of how you react?
Hmm. No, I've not. I've definitely not always been like that. I think this is a sense of maturity that's happened, especially over the last maybe 4 or 5 years.
Hmm.
I mean, with my when my mum passed away, I was still 28. Like for me, relatively young, um, and it just that was the biggest hit. The like had no concept or anything, and I thought I was dealing with it really well because I was like, I'm not having any sort of like emotional breakdown reaction or anything like that. And the funny thing for that one is like 4 years later, not that it was like a complete breakdown, but I was in like I'm sure you've heard of ayahuasca, and I was in an ayahuasca ceremony and they were playing music, and then all of a sudden all the music stopped, and then something about the silence stirred like emotion in me, and it welled up, and I felt like I cried for like an hour or so. I associated that with the sadness, um, and
Yeah.
and even after that, I think this is where I started to realize like it's so important to allow yourself to experience whatever's coming up, and that's what I've developed almost like a muscle over the years, where I realized like, oh, okay, yeah, this is a thing, something's happening. I need to allow this to be because otherwise I'm just delaying the inevitable. It has to come out eventually, somewhere.
Yeah.
So I'm just delaying the inevitable. So that's I think that's something I developed for sure.
What does you being there, being present, versus you not being there and not being present look like? What would you say are distinguishable features between the two?
For me, I guess the simplest thing is I'm either in the moment or I'm in my head and my thoughts. I've always been a bit of an overthinker, so I'm very clear when my mind is like, right, even with this idea of presence, it's like, right, be present. And actually, I'm not being present. I'm just in my mind trying to control the
Yeah.
experience. And I think that's probably the biggest thing. Um, and then and the thing is, because the more removed from that it's the more difficult it is for me to actually acknowledge that I'm going through something. So, and that does happen, and sometimes can take me a little while to go, oh, actually, I'm in a thing. I'm I'm not I'm on autopilot,
Yeah.
and I think that's what it is the difference between being present and just being aware that I'm feeling something, and just being on autopilot and just doing something, just and not being conscious of that. So it's difficult to say define that and be like, hey, these are the signs, because you're not actually going to be present to it, or I'm not going to be present to it. But then the instance that I am, and that is a skill in itself to learn to become aware of your own, like to almost like we did a check in, to
Yeah.
do a check in is to become present enough to do a check in and be like, are you okay? And to myself, am I
Yeah.
okay? So I think these are distinguishing features. Like, am I actually present to how I'm really thinking and feeling, or am I just mindlessly doing other stuff?
And I guess that's a aspect of you being able to manage your emotions, kind of that emotional resilience. Is that correct?
Mm.
And
Yeah.
yeah, go on, yeah, sorry.
No, no, I was going to say, but that it's almost like that. It's not an equation for it, but it
Hmm.
definitely it's something that facilitates it. And this is how I teach it. So I
Hmm.
don't necessarily teach a model of A, B, C. Do you know if you're feeling this, do that. It's
Hmm.
more like becoming aware of emotions and allowing them to be, and then at the heart of it is just being human. It's like allowing ourselves to be really human. And so
Yeah.
the more human we can be by going, oh, it's okay to feel sad. It's okay to cry. It's okay to be angry. It's okay to be upset. The more we can allow these emotions to pass and then process and see what they're really about, or see if there's anything else to look at.
And I guess there are people that kind of don't believe in that, right? So growing up, I guess South Asian community myself, the idea of feeling emotions, being sad, is in a way time consuming. What's the point? There's A to B. You have to get from A to B,
Yeah.
X, Y, Z things you need to do. So how do you like? What's the balance there? Because I understand where that point is coming from. You need to get from A to B. Because there are times when if I push through that emotion, I get things done. But there are other times where that emotion keeps cycling back. So I'm like, okay, let me sit with that emotion, let me feel into it. Both work, but how do you find that balance? And yes, you're right, it's being human as well. But from your experience, yeah, what do you
Yeah.
find the balance is?
I guess, I mean, one question that pops up, if I might ask you,
Go for it,
is
yeah.
what are those moments that you have to push through your emotion in order to keep going?
Good point. For me, the thing that pops up is work. So probably at work. So I'm a physiotherapist
Okay.
by trade. So like working with patients from A to B, the goal is to get from one patient to another. You
Right.
have to push through the emotions of being able to do your checklist of checking the patient, making sure they're okay, um, taking in what they have to say and understanding where they're coming from, what they're feeling as well. So in a way, let's say I have a half an hour appointment, in that moment, it's hard for me to fully grasp and take in my emotions and be like, I feel this way, I feel this way. Sometimes it's possible, but then if there's a patient who's heavily troubled, it's difficult in that sense. So then it's easier for me to get from A to B where I give them the plan, help them out, and then afterwards sit down and be like, hey, I'm feeling like this now. Let me take a breath. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 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 yeah. I think that's a really
That's
good
one
answer.
example I can think of for myself.
Yeah, 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 yeah. But
Yeah.
that I mean, that pretty much answers your question, I suppose. Yeah, because it's true. It's not like I'm constantly like crying or anything like that. Like I find like in the end, as part of being human,
Mhm.
it's also that part of us that hides or shadows or
Mm.
masks. That's also human as well, right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah,
so
yeah.
I think like we naturally do that. Like I don't always cry whenever I feel to cry.
Mhm.
Um, like a one that came up recently. Like I recently had a birthday, and my partner did a really beautiful thing where she got together with a bunch of friends and they put money together to buy me this camera that I've always really wanted. And I was really surprised and taken aback, and I almost cried in that moment. But for some reason, part of me was like, "No, don't do it." and so
Yes, yeah,
and
yeah,
so
yeah.
and so so like I pushed it down. But then later, when I messaged everyone to thank them, I made that part of my message. I said something along the lines of like a 50s man. Like I almost cried. Like it was such a beautiful moment. Like I almost cried, but like a 50s man, I pushed those emotions down, and everyone got it. Like everyone was like, and some people were like, "Oh, it's okay to cry," and I'm like, "I know it's okay to cry." It's like, but I think it's also okay to just, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
it's
yeah, yeah. And
we,
I guess the fact that you acknowledged it as well, didn't you, in that sense?
yeah, and
Yeah.
I think this is the thing. It's like it's really good questions you're asking me because
Mhm.
it's bringing up this like this thing about we don't have to be any particular way, right?
Mm.
But the more we can be at ease with things, the less we like beat ourselves with a stick of authenticity or the opposite of like I'm not allowed to cry or I'm gotta be whatever. Because the first thing I heard, and that's why I asked you that question, is when you were talking, especially like South Asian or Asian in general, right? There's definitely a running theme. is I think for our parents, they came from a background is like they didn't have this luxury of time to think and people talking on podcasts. So it's like, hey man, how you feeling? It's like back then it's like, man, it's like, what time is it? I need to be at work.
Yeah.
And these kids need feeding and
Yeah.
so on and so forth. And it's because of that hard work and stuff that we have the world we live in today for a lot of us, right? Their hard work has provided for us more freedom and time to philosophize and to think it. But yeah, so I think we've inhabited and we've inherited some of their quirks because obviously we saw that growing up. And I also feel like it's part of our journey to recognize that, okay, yeah, there's value in what you said, because of course you're professional. You want to be a professional, and it's not to say you can't show emotion, but you're kind of like navigating where is it good and where is it not good. Where am I serving? Where am I? You want to be serving. You don't want to be selfish, sort of thing, right? So I think it's one of these things of being aware of like what we've inherited from our parents and actually what's true, like what's true for us. Because in some cases, it could be a thing that you could mention or you could say, and I'm sure you'll know when, right? Like and actually sometimes you might just be picking up on one of your clients' feelings and emotions, right? Because that happens a lot as well.
That's actually, yeah. Nice. So I was gonna take this on to, I guess, talking about your workshop. So you do the Shookman workshops.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about that and how you kind of teach what you teach?
Yeah, I guess I should introduce who Shookman is really.
Yeah.
So Shookman is the name in a face that gave that little negative voice that we all often have, right? And it's something that me and my friends used to talk about a lot, especially when we used to go out and like try talking to girls, and the little voice would always be like, "Oh, you can't say this, or you can't go over because you'll get rejected. You're gonna look bad." And then I started realizing that it's not just with dating; it's also in like work and career, whatever you're looking to do, goals. There's always this like nagging little voice. And it was only in like 2016 that I mean, almost intuitively, or essentially intuitively, I decided to draw what he looks like. And and I didn't realize at the time what a powerful thing that was going to be. And what's happened since then is that that's become a transformative tool because it allows us to separate from that talk, that voice that tells us negative things, and realize and recognize that it's actually like a separate character to us. And it's funny because we just mentioned, or I just mentioned, like about our parents, right? And so we pick up a lot of this internal dialogue from the way we're raised and the demands or the expectations that were put on us, and then we go, okay, this is how we need to navigate the world. And then that little voice starts going, well, this is okay. You're doing this. How's that going? And we start to essentially parent ourselves from the inside. So then the workshops were, I was always like, as a man, and at the time, like, in my 30s and stuff, I was like, there's a lot of men that struggle with emotions and, fear and doubt and all these things. And, in the last 10 years, we've seen so much change in the world that a lot of men really struggle to keep up with everything that's going on, especially emotionally. And so initially I was going to like, and I still having plans to, but like I was thinking of like coaching men and younger men. And then the more I went on the journey, the more people kept saying, "Oh, you should do younger, like from 30 to 20, and then 20 to 15." And eventually, one friend was like, "You should teach 10-year-olds." And I was like, "10-year-olds? Like, I don't even know what what they're interested in." So, but I had agreed at that time because there's so many different ways in which I could essentially, so many different paths I could follow with this concept that I just decided, you know what, I'm going to take the next obvious one, and so I followed this path. And initially, it was run with a small group at my friend's home with her daughter and a few of her friends. And I very quickly realized that in these sessions, I was number one actually was that 10-year-olds have the same doubts that adults have, just their goals are different. The same stuff you would hear talking to an adult, the same stuff they're saying. And the crazy thing is that they will say things like they don't have enough money. The 10-year-old. That's one of the number one complaints, like, or things they think stops them in life is that they don't have enough money. So I realized like this is where it starts. Such a young age, and just before they're going to high school. So yeah, so in these sessions, I essentially do it. It doesn't occur this way, but I know it is. I do a deep dive. I get to understand. I get them to understand rather. What is it that they would love to have, and what is it that gets in their way? And then we start to unravel that as that voice, that character, and then I call it Shookman, but I do say they can call it whatever they want. You make it personal to you. And the reason for that is the more you understand it, the better you are at navigating this part, right? And it goes back to what you asked me right at the beginning. How do I navigate all these difficult things? Is because I've been doing this for a while and I've got to understand that little voice in my mind a lot better, to the point that when it comes up, I recognize it as a separate thing and be like, oh right, okay, so cool. Where is it? And it still impacts me, but I have a lot better handle. I call it flying the plane. I'm a lot
Yeah.
better at flying that plane. When it gets too high, I can bring it down. When it gets too low, I can go, hey, what's going on, and check in.
You
So
only
these
can,
workshops are about that. Sorry, go on.
I was gonna say you can only fly that plane if you practice and you keep delving deeper, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm.
The better you know yourself, and that's why I think the idea of being more human is so profound. But the better you know yourself, the easier it gets to do
Mm.
that. Yeah.
Nice. This all kind of the first thing that popped up in my head was like reading a book now. Actually, right now, it's to do with like inner child work.
Oh, amazing.
And there's like a task where literally I only did this the other week, but like gets you to draw like who you think your inner child is, like
Oh,
who you
no way.
think that person is self doubt is. And I started drawing and I was like, but they get you to draw it with your left hand. So your left
Right,
hand is like your inner child speaking to you. So you write from that left hand, whereas your right
right.
side is yourself. So I drew my inner child, then I started speaking to myself, essentially to my inner child, saying how you doing, how you feeling, and I started just writing all this kind of stuff down, and I was like, this is like so powerful yet so simple.
Yeah.
And it also showed me how much like I don't show as much compassion to myself in those times where things aren't going well or things aren't going the way I want. It's almost like I criticize myself, which is
Yeah.
obviously picked up from my parents, how I grew up, versus me, I could be kind of showing myself compassion and I could still be growing and still be getting to things, the places I want to. It's kind of tough love in a way, but like without criticizing, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Compassion, yeah, compassionate love, I guess. More compassionate than hard love. Yeah.
Yeah, the more I've done this, and the funny thing is so I didn't know the word inner child like stuff
Mhm.
before, but essentially it's the same. I mean,
Yeah.
that's always where it comes from. It
Mhm.
is, and like you said, it's so simple. It kind of seems like, nah,
Mhm.
this can't be it. Because as
Mm.
adults, we feel like it has to be complicated. It has to be like this super complex model and stuff. But actually, when you think of a timeline, well, that's exactly what happened. You were born, you were like a blank slate, near enough, and then you pick up all these instances and experiences, and now you are who you are today. There wasn't like a break in that continuum. It was just you, and now you now. But all the experiences and everything you've experienced have led to now. And the other interesting thing is, which was why I was smiling, was the more that I've done this, the more I realized that actually what you're doing, or what we're doing when we're talking to the inner child, is we're parenting ourselves.
Mm.
So you say like you're having that tough love, but is that what you would say to a child? Like if
No,
you saw it,
exactly. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, you see
So,
what I mean?
so what I was gonna say was the tough love is how I was speaking to myself before. I
Right.
was like, do this and you'll get this X, Y, Z. But then I realized as I was doing that task, I was like, actually, this has never been really beneficial towards me. Like it's never
Mm,
been something useful. And it's only times where I'm being like, oh, you're doing good. Like I guess a small wins, showing myself
yeah.
gratitude. Those are the times when I've actually pushed myself forward and be like, I want to get pushed through this and I want to get to the result, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. And it makes me wonder, would you consider yourself a sensitive man or a sensitive
I
person?
would, yeah, I would say
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah,
Mm,
I'm finding that maybe we all are, but I'm finding that
mhm,
that's definitely like a thing that seems to
mm.
be emerging now. Like the men who recognize themselves, because it was like ever since we were young, we were sensitive, whatever, like in whatever way,
Mm.
emotionally, to others, to ourselves. But as we've already established, like we pushed that down, as
Yes,
like
yeah, yeah.
boys, and as we were raised, and tough love and got to get to work and stuff. There's no time for emotions, and
Yes,
actually
yeah.
like it's you start to realize, hang on, this is an integral part of who I am and how I operate. So yeah, so cool that you've discovered this inner child work.
And with yourself, you said you drew that kind of the Shookman within you. How did your like reparenting happen? Like, what was the how were you talking to yourself after you started drawing yourself and kind of seeing this different side to you? What was your communication like to yourself?
But it's been a journey with that as well, and I think it's only when I it's only so I've been a coach, I would say, like for a long time. I've coached in different capacities, in different ways, and it was only after I did a coaching course, which was only a couple of years ago, that I learned some very simple like questions, and I became more curious about the way that like I was engaging with that inner voice. Whereas before I recognized it as a character, and I'd be like almost like, ah, shut up, shook man. Like almost like, he's saying something, but like, ah, you're always like negative. And then over time being like more curious, it's being like, what's up, shook man? Like, what's happening? And the more like similar to yourself, like the more I did that, the more I realized that in a sense I started coaching myself. And it's very simple, what I discovered, because I don't do too much. Like what I mean is there's only ever like a couple of things I ever do, which is one, be curious. So I get curious about why I'm feeling what I'm feeling. So if I treat it like a separate object, I can actually, I don't know if you have this filmed, but this is
Yep.
this a little Shookman model.
Oh, nice. Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
yeah. So this is what. So Shookman is obviously he's fearful. That's why he looks a bit scary.
Yeah.
Um, but essentially,
You
yeah,
also
like
look quite cuddly as well.
well, the thing is, I have to preface it because kids find him cute, but adults often find him scary. So it's quite
Oh,
interesting.
interesting.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah, yeah. It's really interesting. Yeah.
yeah.
I'll leave him down here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So getting curious is what happens now, and I find that it's the same. When I'm teaching kids now, it's the same thing. Yeah, I just remain curious as to what's happening for them. And the other key question I ask myself is I never ask why. I'll only ever ask what. So any why question gets converted into a what question. So instead of saying why are you feeling that way, it's like what's making you feel that way, or what's up, shook man, like what's happening. And I find that gets to the heart of things, like that gets to like what's happening. But really, really powerful. And as you're definitely aware, there's moments, especially like if I am feeling really stuck, I might go for a walk and I'll just run through this. I'll be like, okay, so what's up? And then I'll essentially have a back and forth exchange with my feelings. And I do find when you ask your feelings a question, they give you a response. So it's quite powerful.
Nice. And you're going to get married soon. So congrats on that.
Thanks.
And I guess how are you finding navigating where you are now? You're going to be going to, I guess, a committed marriage going forward. Is there a change in like your thought processes? Like, have you changed the way you speak to yourself as well? And also, how has that affected with your partner as well?
Yeah. So this question is going to open up something that you weren't expecting. So I got married initially to 2021.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that marriage fell apart within like 3 months. Just
Mm-hmm.
completely like imploded, whatever. And that, if anything, when I look back now, it's that like that's almost like my origin story for how I became emotional resilience coach. And because that really taught me like my capacity for resilience. I It was a very difficult time, and I was, of course, I wasn't expecting that and all this stuff. And and since then I've been on like such a journey of creativity, and putting so much emphasis on my own self, my own creativity. Even Shookman really took off in that time. I essentially channeled all that negative or lower energy into my creativity.
Nice.
And I know I've taken a slight segue, but it might be
No, no, it's
useful
perfect. Yeah,
to your
yeah,
listeners. Yeah,
yeah.
is someone said to me, and it was such a powerful thing for me at the time. They said to me, "Why would you look back at something that's not working when you can look forward to something that is?"
Mm,
Right? And I didn't know what was in front of me, other than I had the Shookman concept to create. I wrote the little book that's available to download now on the website and stuff. And and now I'm teaching in schools, and now I'm speaking on your podcast about it, right? So
mm,
like what a journey, right? my partner, who I actually met years ago initially, and we reconnected, and that's its own separate story. She's someone who is so grounded, like emotionally, and what I get now is the sense of maturity that we both bring to this relationship. It's really a powerful, beautiful thing that sometimes I can't even grasp it fully because I've been on such a journey. I feel like from boy to man, right? Like this sense of like immature boy type character to being more mature and more aware and more grounded in myself. And I think like what's changed inherently is my ability to be with such a woman, and to be, these conversations that you and I are having, to have that in a relationship, to be very open and aware, and to just be so free and honoring of each other. So I think, yeah, I'm really excited for the future because I know we want to start a family together. I think like before, I was not in that place. I was more immature. I wasn't in my own creativity, and today I stand in my own creativity and my own abilities. And I still have my ups and downs, and things to work on, but I'm there. I'm like there, and if anything, if there's anything for us to discuss or talk about, I'm there, right? Like, and I feel like that's been the biggest shift. I'm more present and aware.
So, if you don't mind me delving into like the previous marriage,
Yeah,
like
yeah, sure.
who were you back then? Like, what was like? Obviously, you said a few things there, but like,
Yeah, yeah, sure.
how would the older version of you, I guess, behave in like in terms of arguments or conversations or conflict? What was the
Yeah,
difference?
I do you know what I think more it was less about the arguments because even she was quite a chill person.
Hmm.
We didn't really argue so much, but I would say my codependency was so high. Like,
Hmm.
and I was not really in my own, like in my own creative path. Like I had ideas, but it was like you said the word dreamer earlier, but I was more in a dreamer kind of mentality, and I wasn't really following through. There was, of course, I was doing certain things and stuff, but I very much fell on the weaker side of my personality, and I think that's what's changed.
Hmm.
Was not trusting myself, not believing in myself, and not really being me, and so that codependency of like I thinking back, I would have leaned on her massively, as a
Right.
partner. Yeah, I would have leaned on her massively, and if challenges came up, I would be seeking help from her as well. I mean, it was not inherently a bad thing, but I think, I believe rather that we're all here as sovereign creators, and it's so important to know where we stand before seeking others, because often that could be a validation or immature thing. So that's what I would say. That's how I used to be, rather, because the argument stuff is interesting you asked that, because in previous relationships, just to touch on that point, in
Yes.
a
Yeah.
previous relationship,
Yeah.
that was terrible. Like if there was an argument, my instinct was like, this is not going to work, and I would be pushing the partner away. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
I would just be like, and actually that still comes up like a little bit now. It's like a little whisper. I think it's like an
Mm,
identity thing,
yeah.
but it doesn't come out in like in the sort of way, in the pushing sort of way.
Mm,
I would almost say it was. I actually got concerned back then that I was a narcissist. Like
yeah.
people like talk a lot about narcissism, but apparently narcissists don't research about narcissism. So that's apparently, yeah, apparently that's not what they do. So
Cool. So yeah, so you brought up a few things. So in my head, the first thing I was thinking was, to be fair, from the moment I kind of met you, I guess, it was like the idea of shook.
yeah,
So growing up in school, people would be like, "Oh, you're shook," you're
yeah,
scared. So like that's the first thing that popped up in my head as you were talking, because normally with conflict, especially in the past, I would avoid conflict. So I'm someone who would have just been like, pretend nothing is going on, or just be silent and everything is fine. I got married last year as well.
Oh,
And then
congrats.
thank you. Yeah. So we have arguments, and I think it's healthy to have arguments here and there. And I guess
Yeah,
the way I communicate now is a lot different, where I try and stay with my breathing, stay present, and try and listen to her, try and get my point across, and like we have kind of healthy conversations, I would say.
yeah,
So in that sense, I have found, and I guess it relates to what you're saying, working on my emotions, understanding my emotions better, working, I guess, with my inner child in that sense, where I'm able to comfort him, acknowledge him, and show him that he's safe in those moments where, in my head, I'm like, oh, this is going to turn into an argument, which is conflict. I'm able to reassure myself, stay grounded, and then everything else is a lot more healthier afterwards. Does that resonate or make sense?
Yeah, I mean that's the thing the thing that I find in like any sort of relationship is that we're both doing it, right? Like, so you know, your
Mm,
partner will be doing the same as well, and so I think it's, yeah, it's so powerful. At least I think, you know, I still feel we're both relatively young, right? Like
yes,
there's
yeah,
people
yeah.
who've been in relationships for years, and so you know what I mean. Like, I'm not going to claim like this is the golden,
Yeah,
this
yeah.
is the,
From your own experience, yeah.
yeah. From what I know so far, right? And is that ability to own that and take
Mhm,
responsibility for that, as well as having healthy boundaries
mm,
around like what is and what isn't okay.
mhm,
And so like I find with my partner now, like we I don't think we've had like a yelling shouting argument. No, we definitely haven't, but we've had like just differences and disputes. I mean, there was even a point where I would say, people would say to me, how's it going with her, and I'd say, well, we haven't had an argument yet, so I'm a bit concerned. Like,
yes.
because I likened it to watching Jurassic Park, and the dinosaur hasn't escaped yet. So so it's
Mm,
like, because you know, every Jurassic Park it's got to escape, right? So if it hasn't escaped yet, you're like, what's going on? So
yeah.
yeah, you know, I've had a bit of experience with relationships, so you know that's part of the game. So
Hmm.
I think, yeah, that the beauty of it is in recognizing, you know, your own identity in a child, and also your partner being able to recognize theirs, and then even being able to discuss that sometimes. So like, I've had profound moments with my partner where I've said things like, you know, what's coming, and this is a really powerful phrase, what's coming up for me is this. And I had one where I think, yeah, she was, because she's like, she's constantly like moving around and doing different things, and she was in town for a bit, and I said, oh, you know, like, she's like, oh, can we do lunch? Can we do this? I said, cool. I need to do this thing, and what's coming up for me is I really want to be there for you, and I've got work to do, and I know that one of my highest values is relationships, and so part of me wants to default to being there for you, but I also need to do my thing, you know, which is in stark contrast to the codependent me, which would be like, right, let's just do the relationship thing and make sure she's happy, and then forego my own priorities, which, you know, there needs to be some sort of give and take at times, right?
Of
And
course.
she really appreciated it. I mean, she seems to be someone that really cherishes that vulnerability from me,
Hmm.
and like really honors and appreciates that. So yeah, it's really powerful.
Nice. And I guess going back to your old relationship as well, comparing yourself to that version of yourself, did you try and provoke those arguments or conflict, or was it different in that sense, where you would avoid them?
I think I'm similar to you. I think
Hmm.
in terms of conflict, I naturally avoid conflict.
Hmm.
I'm actually, yeah, in terms of some things, I'm seen more as the kind of peacemaker, you know,
Nice.
bringing
Yeah.
people together. I'm very good at finding the middle ground.
Mm.
But yeah, you know, so I think that there's an
Hmm.
avoidance of conflict in there. So I have to be mindful of where, and I suppose in that respect, that this is where being aware of my anger and what's angering me is a very good indication of where I've hit a boundary.
Mm. Um, and have you always been someone who can manage your anger, or have you been someone you've learned over the last, decade or more, how to manage the anger better in that sense?
Yeah, I think I used to suppress anger, you know,
Hmm.
like rather than manage it, I
Hmm.
was very good at suppressing it,
Mm.
and which is also not healthy, right? So I think over the years, I guess it's just becoming more aware that there's a lot of different things. One of them is I've done these spiritual cleanses where it's like a week long detox, where you do a lot of talking, essentially like a talking therapy, but also um, coffee enemas and juicing. And the reason I mention that is because literally in these weeks I feel like I've let go of like long-term frustrations and physically like released it. And I think that really helps because I'm typically the type of character that I am trying to avoid anger, avoid conflict.
Yeah.
And honestly, that sucks, right? Like if you want to run a business, you
Yeah.
like work with people,
Yeah.
there's always going to be something that comes up. So
Mhm.
if I can't face something head on, then I'm not going to go do that. But then since doing those cleanses, I find I'm way more present to it, and I'm way more capable of going, right, I need to have this conversation. I need to, move this piece forward. And I think that's where that's where that comes from. Yeah.
Again, a bit off topic, but I feel like, yeah, I think it's relevant, and I'm curious to know. So you've been obviously through a divorce. You've gone through those kind of stages, those emotions. I know a lot of guys, kind of my friends and like through family, who are like scared of getting married because of divorce, because of the arguments, because of where they might end up afterwards. So having gone through that yourself and now about to be married, what would you say your mindset has been throughout this whole process? And how do you, I guess, not go through that phase of being resentful or angry, letting go?
Man, that's a big one. Not for me. Like for me, it's a big one in the sense that I think everyone's got a unique path, right? And I know exactly what you're talking about.
Mhm.
It would have been so easy for me to slip into that sort of, that alleyway, that
Yeah.
gully of resent and just be like, yeah, I'm not about that life anymore. Um, what is the truthful answer here? I
And
think
this is
like in
just
the
for
grand
you, your
scheme
own
of things, is
experience.
I have vision,
Hmm.
or I have a vision rather of how I want my life to be, and and there's a couple of things, like because actually there's a lot in what you said, because for some of the friends, my first thought is like, well, they're like, it's not really that they're afraid of divorce, it's like they're afraid to commit. So it's like, you know what I mean. That was my first thought. I was like, that's not really, because like, unfortunately divorce is something that can happen. And the second thing that came into my mind is the minute the minute we commit ourselves to love, we've opened ourselves up to grief. As a guy I knew a long time ago, he once said, like, every relationship comes to an end eventually, right? Either there's separation or there's death. There is inherently that sadness. We don't think about it often. We don't want to think about it often,
Yeah.
but that's there, right? And it's like, and I think so. Yeah, the idea of like not taking a step forward because you're concerned, it's almost like saying, I'm not going to live in case I die. And so I mean that's way too philosophical to be pragmatic. uh, so, so so I think the thing is for me is, well, number one is taking responsibility for my life and what's happening to me, because it's not someone else's fault, right? At the very least I can say I picked her as a partner. Like I
Yeah.
said,
Yeah.
at the very least, right? But there's more to it, and
Yeah.
I can be honest about that, right? No, I played my part,
Mhm.
whether it was the codependency, whether it was that I wasn't leading my own life, the best as I could, I wasn't being the best man that I could. These are all factors, right, that participate in an outcome. Um, and then I would say, so yeah, so there's taking responsibility, and then I'd say there's having vision, because I knew for me in the grand scheme of things is like I knew I wanted to have a relationship, I wanted to have a family. And I think also I just wanted to throw something else into the ring, because I think it's something that people don't think about until it's too late. Age. Age is a factor. I look relatively young. I appreciate that's just the way we look sometimes, but I'm 40, and so like for me, I was like, I don't have any kids yet, right? And I don't want to be much older before I have my first child or anything like that, because I'm thinking in terms of like the grand scheme of things, kids take a long time to grow up. So it's like, if I have a kid now, I'm 40. Then when I'm five, when they're five, I'm 45, and when they're 10, I'll be 50, right? So you see what I mean? So
Yeah.
all these different factors came into play, but I think it's so important to take responsibility for what happens in our lives and to find our way to back to what we're trying to do. Because if we let someone else have that power over, oh, I'm not going to do this now because this might happen, then what can we do in life, right? Like we're so stuck. This is how we get stuck sometimes.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice. And I guess speaking of vision, what is your kind of long-term vision with Shookman, with the workshop, with your coaching? Where do you want to take it?
Oh man, yeah, so cool. Like for me, the original vision for Shookman, and it's still there, and I'm still building up to it, is I'd love this to be in story form. I'd love it to be films, to be comics, because I feel like so much of our education, obviously, we do workshops and we sit in a classroom or whatever, but media is such a powerful tool. And it doesn't have to be like me preaching or teaching or anything like that, but through watching things we can learn and through stories that we've been telling, for millennia. Like this is how humans like pass on information. So I'd love for Shookman to be there. And I feel like in the next 10 years or so, it's like building that foundation. Like for the kids that are in the workshops today, the little seed of awareness and self-awareness, or even being aware of their emotions in a different way than we ever were. Imagine in 10 years time, right? So they're 10 today. So when they're 20, they're going to be light years ahead emotionally than we were. And so I'd like to be able to like facilitate that process and grow Shookman in tandem with them learning. So that's where I see things going.
Nice. And two more questions. Um, if there's an audience member listening now, a man who is listening, who understands and kind of intellectually kind of process everything you're saying, and he can regurgitate it, he understands it, but he's still struggling to sit there with their emotions, to kind of feel into their emotions, what advice would you give them? Or what kind of direction would you give them to help them overcome that or deal with that?
So logically they're understanding, but emotionally, yeah, that's a journey, isn't it? That's that right there is the inner child, is the journey. Ask your second question. We'll see if my brain comes up with the
Yeah.
answer for that first one. Yeah.
Um, the second journey was technically, is there anything that you want to kind of
Okay.
ask me, or is there anything else on your mind that you wanted to share?
Okay. So I'll go back to your first question then. So so the thing that just occurred to me was like, I mean, if anyone's just starting, like if
Mhm.
you're literally just starting and you feel you've got very like little awareness, um, it's not the magical fix, but I would say journaling is a very powerful tool just for like very privately allowing yourself to express whatever's there, and it doesn't have to be anything. You can just say like whatever you're thinking, whatever you're feeling, or I feel stuck, and it's like that by actually being curious and getting it out onto paper rather than just thinking about it. That makes such a big difference. I think that's one of the biggest problems we face is that in general is that we think and then we just keep it all up here with some sort of, I don't know why, but well, obviously unless someone tells us, when it's up here it kind of just bounces around and it goes nowhere. But when you get it out on paper and you write it down, all of a sudden you'll see the size of it. You'll see that like Shookman isn't that big. And you'll find different emotions and different words. The other powerful thing as well, as I said that now, is there's a thing called an emotional wheel, and you can find it if you Google. You just Google emotional wheel. I used to have one on the back of my phone. I found I changed phones recently, so it's not on my phone. I was just looking. I could grab my old phone to put it out, but I won't. But yeah, you can find it online, and it has. And the reason why I mention it is because it has loads. It's got a whole circle of emotion, positive and negative, and it's so powerful to look at that because we have such a limited vocabulary for our emotions. And even I've been doing this work for a long time. I'll look at it sometimes and be like, "Oh yeah, that's what I'm feeling." Because you
Yeah.
might say, "Oh, I'm feeling angry," but you're agitated.
Yeah.
You might say you're fearful, but you're just a little bit scared or a little bit on edge. And so by widening our emotional vocabulary, it gives us more of an access to what we're thinking and feeling.
Mhm.
And as for your second question, I'm genuinely just intrigued about you. I suppose it's like it's been such a cool conversation. You seem like you've been on such a journey yourself. So I suppose, yeah, how are you doing? Where are you at?
Yeah. um, I'm doing good. And I'm not just saying that for the sake of saying that. So I think the last year has been kind of navigating married life and kind of just settling in, finding our feet together, living together at the same time. So that's been really nice. And I think we're learning about each other. And I feel like it's been over a year now, just over a year, and I feel like we've found our kind of ground. So that's been really nice. And then I guess in terms of career work, it's finding my foot. So I do physiotherapy. I do also do coaching, um, and helping in a lot of men's group. So for me, that's the direction I want to go into. And I think it's almost finding my feet and kind of pushing myself to kind of be seen more in that kind of light and being seen as the coach or the men's group facilitator. So I think that's where I'm at right now. So I feel like this part of my journey is more about kind of career focus and finding my own confidence within that kind of own that niche, that kind of environment, that kind of space. Does that make sense?
Because you occur as someone that's done quite a bit of work, and so what would you say has been your main point of transformation, or was there something, or was it more gradual?
Mm. Um, Main transformation. The first thing that pops up for me is probably just before I met my current wife, which is where I was going through a phase of one, not committing to anything. So it's almost like a lack of commitment. So similar to what you mentioned before. So prior to that, I was doing a lot of work on myself. So I was like building confidence, trying to overcome anxiety, and that was a gradual thing, and I was building that up. But I feel like with relationship, I always struggled with that. So there's always like going back and forth, trying to find my foot. And I feel like the main transformation happened, and that I'm trying to think of why, but I know for a fact it was like the moment I decided I'm going to commit to this, I'm going to make it work, and it was almost like when I made that decision, although there was reasons for me to not commit, or like I would come up with reasons not to commit. It was almost like, as opposed to listening to those reasons not to commit, I made a decision to kind of work through them. So I feel like that decision helped me because after that, a lot of things happened, but I was able to understand my emotions better, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you just
Yeah.
you just reminded me of something I used to say, like, because I I never realized until until I've been for it for a while, but I ended up being like a serial dater for a while,
Mm.
and I came up with this whole thing called the three prongs, and I realized that, so like what they were the three things that were going to keep me single if I always followed through on them.
Oh,
And
interesting.
so
Okay, yeah.
yeah, so like the first one was I could be seeing a girl for a while, and then the little voice will pop up and say, "Oh, she's not good looking enough," and like I
Mm.
need to go find someone better
Yeah.
looking. And if I was able to get past that one, the second one would be like, in conflict, in argument,
Hmm.
my instinct would be like, "Oh, we're not compatible." Right?
Yes. Yeah, yeah,
There's
yeah.
an argument, we're not compatible. But the third one is what actually gave them all away, because the third one is something that I never fulfilled on. Is the third one that would always come up is she's not Muslim, or she's not Muslim enough, and I would never date Muslim girls. And
Ah,
so I
yeah.
and so I realized that I had this like structure that if I always listened to it, it was
Yeah.
just keeping me single this whole time. So yeah.
And I guess, is your current partner, is she Muslim or
No, no, she's
no?
not. Like
Okay, fair enough.
I've transcended the model. I'm playing a complete different game now.
5D chess.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
um, I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. And yeah, I would love to have you back as well with other people as well if you're
Oh,
open.
thanks. Yeah, I'd love to, man. It's been a pleasure to have this chat with you, and to meet you properly. Yeah.
Is there anything else that you want to kind of share? Anything on your mind? More questions?
Well, I suppose if anyone's interested in the work that I'm doing, like I said, I have started with teaching primaries in primary schools. So if you are a head teacher or someone that's in a primary school, get in touch. You can find me at www.shookman.com. But I am also a coach for men, and this work that I do with Shookman is not just for kids; it's for everyone really. I'm starting with the kids because that's the most obvious place to begin. It's just me at the moment doing this, right? So, but I'd like to expand fully one day to having more workshops and all sorts of things going on. So yeah, the best place to find me in terms of my socials would be at shook.man on Instagram.
Mhm.
That's where I'm most active. But also, yeah, the website, as I said, www.shookman.com. But yeah, bit like I said, it's been an absolute pleasure to have this conversation today. And yeah, thanks for having me.
My pleasure, and I'll put your details down below as well. So anyone that wants to look into Shookman or other stuff you're doing, they can look that up down below.
Cool, thanks.
Sweet, perfect. Thank you.